Hey everyone, I should have really never started 3D printing because now I don't want to do anything else. I'm having a ton of fun. It's definitely become my top passion right now. And hand in hand with 3D printing goes 3D sculpting or 3D modeling. Many of you might know, but the observatory is two separate people. There's my brother who does all the 3D modeling, and then there's me who does all the voiceover and editing for the videos. Now, over the course of the last few years, I've learned a lot about how to 3D model, but I'm still really kind of uncomfortable with the program as a whole, and sculpting is definitely brand new for me, so I got no clue what I'm doing. But I've spent the last couple weeks kind of tinkering around, and I thought that maybe I'd just show you my process of how I'm learning to sculpt and how to turn those sculpts into a model that's printable, or just exporting them as an STL and that whole process. And then show the process of taking the finalized STL into Chidubox and turning it into something that's printable. And maybe interject a few tips or tricks that I've compiled over the last couple weeks of hopelessly learning how to do all of this. So the first thing that I'm going to do in Blender is open up my base blend. This base is 25 millimeters, or roughly an inch. It's perfect size so that when you export it as an STL and open it up in whichever 3D printing program you're using, it's 25 millimeter, or about an inch. I struggled for a while trying to figure out how to use in Blender measurements to make it perfect and stuff like that, and I never could quite get it. So I did the only thing any reasonable person would do, and I copied somebody who was better than me. I found this amazing gentleman by the handle MZ4250, and he has a Patreon that is just full of D&D miniatures, which is partially what I'm very into 3D printing right now. And they're all free to download. They're amazing models, really nice sculpts, stuff that for the time being I could never hope to do. As well as he has a Shapeways storefront. It's a storefront, and I think he might sell the sculpts so you can buy the actual models from him. He might print them for you. I'm not sure. However, if you make a Shapeways account, you can download all of these for free, the STL. So for somebody who doesn't really want to spend a whole bunch of money compiling 3D miniatures and isn't super great at sculpting, say, any of these amazing creatures that he's made, you can download these and support them and print them, which is amazing. This is amazing. If you see this, Mr. MZ4250, thank you so much. And on his Patreon, he also has the blends, pre-supported files, and just the STLs straight up. So it's an overall win. It's an amazing thing. Thank you. Thank you so much. So like I was saying, I just downloaded one of his models, an STL, and then I imported that STL into Blender. He also has the blends that you can just open up. And then I just roughly copied the same shape and size as his base, and that's been working for me really well. I obviously had spent a little bit more time getting it very close for this one, so I'll include this base.blend up on our Patreon if anybody else just wants a base that's the right size. 25 mil, or an inch. There it is. So like I said, I'm not super skilled with the whole sculpting yet, but I can still kind of make 3D environmental things for my tabletop games with not a whole lot of issue. It's only been a couple weeks, but I have the rough idea of what I'm doing down. So for today, I'm going to be building some egg clutches. Obviously, you saw the lizard men a little bit earlier. Lizard folk, egg clutches. Go hand in hand. It's perfect. So to serve as kind of the muck pile, I'm going to use a cone. And then for the egg themselves, I'm just going to add a sphere. Size it up a bit. Almost done. I'm going to disable the visibility of the sphere to mess with my cone a little bit. Delete all of the faces and kind of just extrude out some more to get kind of a rounded area. You could use half a sphere or whatever you wanted. Just did it with a cone because it's easy. Now I'm going to disable the visibility of the cone, and then I'm going to enable the visibility of the sphere and go over to sculpt mode, which is just hitting this sculpting tab. It kind of takes you to its own interface. It's nice. I extend out this sidebar so I can see all my tools that I don't really know what they do yet, but I kind of have a rough idea. And then with this elastic deform tool, I'm going to scroll out so that I can get more of it it works almost like proportional editing. You kind of grab a larger area with it as you're zoomed out further. And I'm just going to grab it and kind of drag it up a little bit, and it's an egg. It's an egg really quickly. Now that I've got my basic shape all figured out, I'm going to go up here and hit remesh. And then I'm going to remesh at 0.05. I'm not sure the exact reason for remeshing at 0.05, just a lot of the people that I've watched sculpt so far, when they remesh, they do it at that level, and it seems to work really well. So if it ain't broke, don't fix it, right? Then I'm gonna hold shift and just kind of smooth the egg out. It's an egg. Super easy. Now I'm gonna go back into the modeling tab, disable the egg, and re-enable the base plate and the cone. Try to kind of get the cone on the base plate a little bit better, or maybe even in it a little bit. And head back over to sculpting. The first thing I'm going to do is remesh at the 0.05 again. It's just going to give me more geometry to work with. Just a little bit more, well, a lot more. It's going to get a lot more geometry. Then once again, by holding shift, I can just kind of smooth all the raggediness down. I've noticed that a lot of times when you're trying to sculpt something and it has like a hard edge, when you smooth it, it kind of gets weird geometry on it. So if you got some object that has a hard edge, be careful when you start sculpting. I don't know the reasoning so far, but that's where I'm at. Sculpting is fairly intuitive. You can kind of just do whatever you want, and you can eventually get it to what you want. There is some like weird geometry areas occasionally, but you can usually smooth those out or hide them. The tips and tricks I kind of learned for sculpting so far by watching a ton of people who are far more talented than me at sculpting is to make use of the current geometry as much as possible. Before you remesh or enable dynamic topology, always try to get the most out of what you got, and then continue remeshing. Obviously, I went for a really, really easy sculpt because I'm still quite a beginner. It's a pile of like stalactite and mud and stuff. And that, like piles of gook and things are pretty hard to mess up. You can make it look really flat, I guess, but even then, mud is flat sometimes, so you don't really have to worry about that. And I wanted to give it a little bit of like visual intrigue, since it's going to be something that's like uniquely on the board when my players are going into a cave or something. So you want it to kind of look like, oh, I wonder what that thing is amongst the eggs, or, you know, whatever. Just, I threw some like stalagtite typey things in there and tried to do my best to make it look like it was kind of creature created, like just a nesting area of sorts in a damp cave. And then every time you remesh, you kind of end up with all these crazy jagged edges that you just want to smooth over, and sometimes you lose some definition. But like I said, with the draw tool and stuff, it's pretty easy. It's pretty easy to do, and I was always daunted by sculpting in general. Obviously, making something more like character-like is going to be harder than a pile of goo, but you start where you can. And as you play with all the tools and the inflate and deflating, you get to learn that like no matter what tool you're using, if you hold shift, it's smoothing. If you hold control, it does the opposite of it. So if you want to inflate something, use the inflate tool, and then if you want it like crater down, hold control and you just kind of pull a chunk down. And that works with all of the tools. If you have crease tool or anything, you can just hold control and it does the opposite, which is really neat. Also, another thing that I learned is that when you're remeshing, don't take too far steps down. Like, remesh to half of the geometry size or something like that. Don't remesh like way far down, because a lot of times you end up with unnecessarily complicated geometry. And not that it really matters for 3D printing, because this thing could be like 16 billion tries, and if your computer can run it, you can print it. It's not going to hurt it at all. So now that I kind of got my goo pile all looking the way that I want it to, I'm going to add the eggs to every section. I'm going to do that really easily just by Shift-D duplicating it a couple times, scaling them and rotating them. You just slap them in there. It's great. You don't have to like join anything together. This isn't going to be used in any sort of like video game or render or anything like that. So you can just kind of slap it all in there. If you have anything else, however, like say you wanted to keep an egg off to the side so that in the future you could duplicate it, when you export that as an STL, that egg is going to be in there. So if you want to do that, just have a different save. And then the final thing, once you kind of get it the way that you want it, is simply exporting it as an STL. And bam, done. Open up Chitubox, or Chitubox, I'm not sure how to say it. Open that bad boy up, and here it is. That's really as simple as it gets. Like, I made a thing, and now I'm gonna 3D print a thing, and that's pretty cool. That's pretty awesome to me. I'm still infatuated with this whole situation. So to maximize print time, I'm going to throw multiple models on here. It's pretty easy. I didn't make a whole lot of variations, so I'm gonna mirror them across the X and Y a couple times just to look a little different between each model, which is also something that's really neat. I'm going to angle them all at a 50-degree angle, which just helps with, as you're printing, each slice isn't too thick, so it doesn't stick to the FEP. I've had some problems with that when I originally started. I was just printing stuff flat without very many supports, and it printed 25% of the time. A lot of the times the whole base plate would just be stuck to the bottom of the FEP, which is like the resin vat, the film at the bottom of the resin vat. And while you're supporting, you just throw a couple of supports on here. It shouldn't take too much as long as your exposure time is correct. I'll show you once I get into my the longer program that I have, which is I have an Orange 10 by Longer for my 3D printer. It's rather small, but it does an excellent job. And as long as you have a proper exposure time, this amount of support should be enough. You can always mess around with exposure times and figure all that out. That is far outside of my area expertise. I figured it out enough to do the 3D printing. Maybe I can look into it if anybody has any questions, but this is what I've learned. So here's my longer program for my Orange 10. This just has all of the natural settings, so I don't have to mess around with exposure times or anything like that. In Chitubox, mine just came with its own thing. Now simply I open the pre-supported model from Chitubox and I get it all on my build plate, which is this thing here, and now slice it. I haven't ever sliced anything at more than 50 micron or less than 50 micron, so I just go with 50 micron because that's what I know. And then you look kind of through the slice and see if there's any floating islands that aren't attached to anything. A lot of the programs will just show a little gray bar indicating that this is going to print unattached to anything first, and that's somewhere that you need to throw supports. Most obvious is overhangs and things like that, and if you don't put a support there, it's just going to print it and either end up in your resin as a little floating free agent that'll mess something else up, or it might even end up stuck to the FEP and end up kind of squashing one of the slices that come after, and then you end up with a half flat egg and you're like, why did this happen? That's why. Make sure you support everything. You can throw in a lot of extra supports. It won't really mess up anything. It'll use more resin and might be a little bit harder to clean. Especially at the higher exposure levels, the supports can get pretty tough. So that's why there's so many different supporting options. You can make the supports thinner, you can put a lot more in. You just kind of got to play around with your printer, your exposure times, and see what works the best for you. Set the exposure time to 12,000 milliseconds, or 12 seconds, and save it as an LGS. And then you just put it on the machine, and the machine will print it, which is pretty cool. This is it printing. It's awesome. I love this so much. I have not enjoyed myself as much as I have currently for a long time. It's so sci-fi feeling still. I'm just like, I start with a resin of, like a big vat of resin, and you print your own little things, and you're awesome. And here it is. This is our finished eggs in a pile of goob. That's how easy it was. It's really easy. If I can figure this out and do this, you guys can too. So, you know, 3D printing is a lot of fun. If you have the funds to get a 3D printer, I highly suggest it, because it's so much fun. Thank you all for watching. I hope you enjoyed. I will post the base.blend as a blend file in STL up on our Patreon, as well as I'll include the egg thing if you want to just look at it or change it or do whatever. You can print it. Have fun. Thank you again. Stay safe. I love you all. Goodbye.